Vlady Putin, the terribly tiny ruler. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away from anywhere remotely resembling democracy, there lived a diminutive dictator named Vlad. Though his ego towered larger than his modest 5 feet 5 inches stature, Vlad always felt comically small compared to the grandiose delusions consuming his mind. It wasn't easy being the supreme leader of one of the largest nations on Earth when you're basically hobbit-sized. Vlad's struggles with short leader syndrome began at an early age. As a young KGB agent, his code name was actually Oompa Loompa, because of his quirky gait and disproportionately large head. The bullying from his taller, more intimidating comrades was endless. Who left the garden gnome in the interrogation room? They would mock during Vlad's prisoner interrogations. Of course, when a 4 feet 8 inches rage gremlin is glaring up at you while twisting your arm behind your back, he does tend to command a bizarrely specific form of fear and respect. After staging an elaborate coup largely inspired by overcompensating for body dysmorphia, Vlad found himself unexpectedly taking the reins of the Russian regime. His first few years atop the oligarchy were marked by constant overcompensation, a revolving door of ill-fitting suits, and intense jealousy toward literally anyone of average height. World leaders quickly caught on that mentioning Vlad's vertical deficiencies was a psyche-shattering insult that could trigger the little man into picking foolish battles and invading neighboring territories at the slightest provocation. Vlad maintained his mile-high ambition to revive Russia as a global superpower, even as his fellow authoritarians at the diminutive Dictators Club's annual meetings mocked him as Comrade Modest. Nothing, however, filled Vlad's heart with more petty jealousy than the idea of tall, strapping leaders going shirtless for feats of ostentatiousness. Desperate for his own demigod photo op, he demanded to be airbrushed into fake propaganda images of himself riding horses semi-nude like Vladimir the Centaur, a gleaming 8-pack etched across his physique. On a chilly day in Moscow, world media assembled outside the Kremlin awaiting Vlad to stride out for the big unveiling of his ripped, horse-mounted alter ego. But as the Iron Curtain raised, the most unintentionally hilarious scene ensued, a minuscule Vlad riding not a stallion, but a humble Shetland pony, his pale muffin top spilling over his saddle as the gentle creature strained under his leader's not-so-wee weight. As riotous laughter echoed across Red Square, Vlad flew into a blind rage not seen since that time his staff erected full-sized military parade ribbons well above his reach. "Which one of you curmudgeons tranquilized a dwarf horse?" his tiny voice bellowed across the square, audible only to children and lapdogs. This will mean war with the West if there are not more complimentary edits to make Supreme Leader look mighty. Our virile, shredded propaganda must be perfect. From that humiliating day forward, the vengeful little despot began consolidating authority to ensure no such public indignities. Portraits of Vlad as a tall, chiseled, shirt-unbuttoned macho hero looking like a romance paperback cover model adorned every street and office across the empire. And woe befell any local bureaucrat whose loudspeakers blared unflattering actual audio recordings of Vlady's small, squeaky voice, off to the gulag for them. As his insecurities spiraled beyond the Kremlin walls and into foreign policy, Vlad's delicate ego caused increasingly petulant military escalations around the world. The highly versatile autocrat even briefly declared literal war on ladders for making him look silly and small whenever he struggled climbing one during public ceremonies. Fed up with the international community body-shaming via cruel sanctions, the manlet of Moscow finally unveiled his secret plan to prove he towered above all comers as the planet's most supreme ruler: robotic gyrodyne suits. These special platform shoe-like motorized appendages could elevate Vlad's tiny feet a dizzying 6 to 8 feet off the ground, allowing him to look fellow leaders straight in the eye, for once. As his Red Square robo-augmented rally commenced, the wee warrior's stilt-like metal legs raised him up like a massive muppet until his disembodied torso loomed over crowds of onlookers waving little Russian flags. "Can you peons hear me up here?" Vlad cackled in his newly booming baritone voice. "At last, I have ascended to gigantic heights fit for the supreme ruler of all Russia." Vlad's robotic legs whirred and clanked as he stomped around Red Square, accidentally crushing several militia members under his steel feet. "My apologies, I'm still getting used to operating this marvelous machine of manliness," the vertically overcompensating dictator bellowed. "But make no mistake, I shall not rest until all of Mother Russia regains her former stature and glory. With his newly gifted towering existence, the newly dubbed Robo-Putin set his sights on bullying nearby nations back under the Kremlin's spheres of influence by any means necessary. As his metal feet thundered across Eastern Europe, panicked citizens fled in terror at the sight of the colossal robo-ruler rapidly encroaching on their borders. While major world powers feebly protested and levied toothless sanctions, Robo-Putin gave zero squats, mercilessly resuming payroll of former Soviet states one devastating footprint at a time. Try and stop me now that I have the top-tier high ground, you Yankee diddledorks and your stumpy leaders. Putin's amplified taunts echoed across the continent as he carelessly kicked over whole villages during his conquest. Feeling emboldened by his new skyscraping might, Robo-Putin took his invasion efforts to the next level. If he couldn't shrink his adversaries down to size, he'd simply grow to new supersized heights and steamroll them flat himself. With a few minor upgrades by his sweaty engineers, Vlad's once moderately enhanced robo-suit now transformed him into a swaggering, 50-story tall armored behemoth fit for truly gargantuan feats of warmongering and city smashing. As the newly dubbed Mega Putin stood astride the entirety of eastern Ukraine like a giant mech from the future, the diabolical dictator made excessive use of his fresh height advantage by unleashing a relentless bombardment of huge, flaming, meatball missiles. Yes, apparently even Mega Putin's inflated ego couldn't resist childish fart humor by weaponizing his namesake Russian culinary favorite against his defenseless foes below. Though the citizens of Kiev were initially terrified of what appeared to be fiery meteors raining from the heavens, they soon realized it was just a barrage of Slavic meatballs the size of monster truck tires splattering everywhere. Comrades, you are now under the complete rule of Mega Putin, consumer of nations and destroyer of cities, the colossal robo-ruler announced with his voice shaking windows across the capital. Unless you enjoy being smothered in an endless torrent of meatball hell, I suggest prompt and total surrender. As the bombarded citizens wiped breadcrumbs and scorching tomato sauce from their dazed visages, they realized the absurdity of the situation. Was this mighty threat they feared merely an overgrown man-child pitching a ridiculous tantrum? Deciding they'd endured enough of this meatballed madness, the last remaining fighter jets took to the skies with a daring plan. Using experimental anti-giant robots missiles designed by the nation's top nerds, the pilots locked onto Mega Putin's armored form. At just the right moment as the colossal dictator bent over to replenish his launchable meatball ammunition, they took the shot, directly at his distended rear end. Time seemed to slow as the high-velocity warhead found its mark, causing Mega Putin's robotic chassis to erupt into a magnificent detonation. As flaming shrapnel and breadcrumbs rained from above, an escape pod ejected and went soaring high into the atmosphere before deploying a parachute at the highest reaches. Out floated the resting figure of Vladimir Putin himself, now appearing childlike and undeniably miniature after being separated from his technological monstrosity. As he gently parachuted down to the ground, Vlad was swarmed by relieved Ukrainians who captured and hogtied the disgraced leader with strings of sausage links before anyone could get seriously hurt. In his final moments before being hauled off to International Criminal Court, Vlad the tiny tyrant could only gaze up at his towering metallic husk, watching it topple to the ground with a thunderous boom. "Why am I always such a little big shot?" he sighed, at long last accepting his modest limitations. And thus ended the reign of Mega Putin, terror of Eastern Europe and lover of massive meatballs.